Welcome to the Friday night first birthday celebration meeting of Keep It Simple. It is now with great pleasure and much gratitude that I introduce Terry M. Terry, it's over to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Terry, and I'm an addict. It's been wonderful to spend the last couple of hours with you. Blows my mind to see the power of God at work in the rooms of Cocaine Anonymous. So happy first birthday. Keep it simple. When you think about whatever was behind your decision to start that first meeting, and just imagine for a moment how many lives have been touched and changed, how many children have been cared for instead of abused, how much love has been spread across this planet by the loving action that you all took to start this. It's akin to what happened in November of '82 when this drug that everybody just loved called cocaine came on the scene. And everybody was snorting cocaine and they were filling the dance clubs and everybody was, we are family, and we were having the time of our lives. And then the song changed, right? Then came the paranoia. Then came the self-hatred. Then came the broken relationships. And then came the blameless children's and the parents who couldn't understand how their own child would steal the most precious heirloom like grandma's wedding ring that was supposed to be passed down and turned it into a $20 rock of cocaine. What was this drug that came in so innocently and became so, I don't even know the word for it. We've heard examples of what it does. The power of drugs to destroy human life. But so far today, we've been celebrating the solution. And it blows my mind to think of what Cocaine Anonymous has done in my life and in the lives of my family. And it all began because someone worked their 12-step on me. You know, in the big book, it says that an alcoholic or an addict armed with the truth about themselves can enter into a place that no one else can go. You know, my mother tried desperately to help her son. You know, she used shame because that's all she knew, right? And my father used physical violence, and you know, the schools use counselors, the police use handcuffs, the military use court-martials. Nothing worked. Judges use sentences. Nothing worked. I met a woman beyond my wildest dreams, and I thought love will rescue me, and that didn't work either. And then she gave me sons, and I held my boys up to the rising sun out here in Arizona. And I held them up like out of the Lion King. Wait now, I've got boys. And then I stole the money out of their piggy banks to buy crack cocaine. Man, by the time a member armed with the truth about themselves reached into the grave I'd been digging for years, I was buried all the way up to here, and the last few shovelfuls were ready to cover my face. And a dude looked at me. It was in a pawn shop. And he said, man, I don't know if you're in trouble or not. You've been coming in here a lot. He said, and right away my mind was going like, oh, shut the fuck up. Oh, one more person's going to ask me something like, you have so much talent, or what about those kids, or you're a great athlete, or whatever it is. You got all this potential. I hated myself. All I could think about in the months leading up to that moment was killing myself, because I knew that I was worth nothing as a human being. Every time I've stopped, which was countless times, I've sworn on the Bible, on the lives of everything sacred, on the lives of my children, on my dead mother's grave. I've sworn on everything sacred, and then I pick up again. And I don't know why. I've never, I'm 70 years old. I never knew anybody who ever got sober. Everybody I knew went to prison or to the grave. And so here I was thinking I'm just headed to that early grave when this man turned it on me. And as my mind was slamming shut, he said, I used to be in trouble. And then he told me a couple things about his story. He said, I couldn't stop drinking and drugging. And I went to recovery and I got introduced to Cocaine Anonymous and I got introduced to AA and I got sober, man. He said, and I've rebuilt my life and I've been clean and sober now for 4 years and I own this pawn shop and everything in it. And then he smiled and he looked at me and he said, a lot of it used to be yours. And I thought, fuck, that is cold-blooded shit. But I will tell you what, that day, I drove to a detox and began my journey. That was on May the 19th, 1991. And I smoked crack in the parking lot of that rehab, and I drank liquor, and I was driving a stolen van conversion. And I smoked till the sun went down, and I stepped out of that van. I threw that crack pipe out in the field, and I walked through the doors, and I said, help me. And they said, well, try. I called my wife, Donna, the mother of my 2 children, and I said, I've turned myself in for treatment. And she said, thank God. I was so sick, right? So I'm 6'4". And I weigh 200 pounds. I don't know what that converts to in stones, but I'm a big man. At that time, I weighed 140 pounds. That's 60 less than I am today. I was sucked up. I was even shorter. And I know you don't grow taller between 35 and 70, but I was always this tall. It's just I was always looking down because I hated to look other people in the eye because I was so filled with the shame and the pain of my behaviors. And I was in that hospital so sick. They put paper slippers and hospital clothes on me. And I was in there for 4 days. And after being in there for 4 days, I had my first clear thought. And that thought was, I'll bet there's another hit in that pipe. And just then, they announced an AA meeting next door. I followed them out the door, not to go to the meeting. They went right to go to the meeting. I went left to go to the field, and I found that pipe. And I stuck it in the waistband of my hospital clothes, and I went back in the bathroom of this detox, and I put the fire to the pipe, and I saw oils, and I took the biggest hit, and I blew out this huge cloud of smoke, and I felt nothing. And then I looked in the mirror and there was something on my lip and I went like that and it crawled down my hand and it was a bug. I looked in the pipe and it was filled with bugs. I had just smoked bugs. And now that's my sobriety date, May the 23rd, 1991. Now, the reason bugs do not get you high, because if they did, I would still be out there smoking probably. But what happened for me was I looked at my reflection and I thought, I'm fucked. I did not know that's synonym for my first step. But I climbed on top of that plastic covered mattress. There was no fight left in me. And I said, God, help me. If there's another way to live, you got to show me. Even though I didn't believe in God. But everybody does when you hit the dark night of the soul. The very next day, they transferred me to another detox facility. And my wife and my little brother were visiting me. And they walked in, they said, hey man, you got to go next door into it's a mandatory meeting for everybody in detox. And now everybody thinks I'm clean and sober for 5 days, but I know the lie I'm holding, right? And I go into that meeting of Cocaine Anonymous, and I heard laughter. I heard hope. The man who chaired the meeting is still a close friend almost 35 years later. The guy who spoke that night, the only words I remember from the meeting was, he said, it's like I wake up every morning and my head is in a jar on the nightstand and its eyes pop open. It says, it's about time you got up. We've got shit to talk about and none of it's good. And I thought, fuck, I know that. I know that feeling. And when the meeting was over, they did a 20-minute share and then they would pull tickets. And there were like 100 members of Cocaine Anonymous there. And the first ticket they pulled was my little brother's. And he said, I'm just here trying to, my big brother's my hero, man. My heart's breaking watching him die. And the second ticket they pulled was mine. And I said, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm just afraid. And the third ticket they pulled was my wife Donna's. And she just cried. And as I look back and I realize if there are 100 people there and they pulled our 3 tickets, what are the odds of that? Most would say they're almost impossible. But all of us that have ever done this for any period of time know that the odds of that happening are 100% in the rooms of Cocaine Anonymous. Because this is the place where we watch the dead rise. This is where we watch miracles happen every single day. Bill wrote those words, the age of miracles is upon us. We need look no further than our own recoveries for proof of that. My life is filled with miraculous stories of recovery for me and for the people that I've been around. So we are not a glum lot. And I know how to stay that way. And the way you stay that way is by staying involved and working with a lot of people. Because the more people you sponsor, the more you encounter your own brokenness. It's been in the journey of sponsorship that I'm working with the guy. I remember I'm working with this cat and he's doing great. And he says, hey man, I got a bicycle. He'd been riding the bus. And I said, oh, that's good. Where'd you get the bike? And he said, at the convenience store. I said, well, they don't sell bikes. He goes, yeah, I bought it in the parking lot. I said, man, that's not a bike. That's stolen. You're riding a crack pipe. And he said, fuck, dude, you're not the one who has to walk to the bus station. And I said, man, when we started this journey 60 days ago, your own mother wouldn't talk to you, and she's talking to you now. You're like doing good, bro. Just trust this process. He said, what would you do? I said, I'd walk that bike to the police station, tell them the story that you bought it, give them your name, and if nobody claims it, they'll give it back to you in 60 days, and ride the bus and keep doing what we're doing here in these meetings. And he said, well, I'm not willing to do that. I said, all right, bro, it's your choice. I still offered his love, friendship, and sponsorship. When I walked away that day, I knew he was fucked. He proved me right. See, I don't sponsor out of the big book alone. I sponsor out of my heart. And it breaks it sometimes, man. When you're willing to jump into this thing and go in deep with people, into their brokenness, into their wounds, then you've got to be willing to feel the pain of that sometimes. You don't own it like the girl Lisa said earlier, right? We can't own it. But I sure do feel it. But when I walked away from there, I thought, fuck, man, when I was out there young, I robbed a bicycle factory. So I got the opportunity to call my sponsor and said, I was just working with a guy who was unwilling, but I realized I robbed a bike factory. So I started buying bicycles. And if you have been in the state of Arizona at a Cocaine Anonymous auction, you have probably bought a bicycle. I have provided so many fucking bicycles, I can't imagine. I think I've paid my dues, but I keep doing it because it's just like, hey, I love this stuff. I love Cocaine Anonymous with all my heart. I love the good. I love the bad. I love the joy. I love the sadness too. Not so much love the sadness, but it's part of it, right? I just have I've been doing this a long time, right? Next month, I'm going to celebrate 35 years in Cocaine Anonymous. And from the moment I got sober, they said, man, jump in and start doing service. And so I joined the H&I committee when I was 6 months sober, eligible. And I went into the prisons for the next 30 years. 30 years behind the walls. Fuck, I could have committed murder and gotten out in 20. And, 30 years behind the walls, carried the message of Cocaine Anonymous to thousands of inmates. And spending some unbelievable time with other people, driving an hour and a half each way to the middle of the desert to a penitentiary. What joys. One of the men that I rode out with for 20 years every week, I'd pick him up, hour and a half out to the prison. We always do hour and a half long meetings because they only get one a week, and an hour and a half back. And we were cruising back and we'd talk about life, our kids, family, joy, all the things that you talk about amongst friends here in recovery. We'd talk about how to help others more and who's making a difference and what we can do better, and always making the most of it. But he loved music, and he loved a band called REO Speedwagon. And whenever REO Speedwagon would come on the radio, I would crank it up, and me and this dude would sing REO Speedwagon at the top of our lungs. And then we would make the deal. Whenever REO Speedwagon came to Arizona, I would go with my wife. He would take his wife and daughter, and we would all go to REO Speedwagon. Take it on the run, baby. I'm not much of a singer, but I'll try anytime because I am not a glum lot. I am alive in this world. Just yesterday, I had a beautiful memory of my friend. Cocaine Anonymous, life is hard sometimes. And John encountered something really hard. When I first 12-stepped this man, I 12-stepped him off a suicide attempt. And suicide was always his go-to in those early months of recovery. When that's your jam, that's a hard one to break. And what had happened is he picked up. And then he was in an accident, he hit somebody, and he thought, I'm going to go to the same prison I've been carrying messages to. And the weight of the pain was too great. And my friend stuck a gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger 7 months ago. I was just on a spiritual retreat last weekend, and I sent his wife and daughter a note. And I told them how much I loved their dad and her husband. And let him know that he was in my heart and in the hearts of some of his other friends there. So just yesterday morning, I'm driving to do a H&I meeting. And REO Speedwagon came on the radio, and I turned that motherfucker up full blast, and I sang at the top of my lungs, and the tears were streaming down my face. And when I got to that meeting, we had one of the best Cocaine Anonymous meetings on step 1 you could ever imagine. We talked about what's at stake here, right? We're not a glum lot. But under the surface of this shit is a deadly disease that doesn't really want us dead. It just wants to live our lives. It wants to make me suffer. It wants me to disconnect from everything that's important and beautiful in my life. But what I know is that if I keep following this, some of the stories don't end up tragically. Some of the stories end up pure magic, like my life. Like, I got a phone call while I was on this retreat from a young man who I'm now his grand sponsor. I was his sponsor before. And he said, hey, dude, I want to ask about a question. My daughter's really struggling with substance abuse. And I feel guilty that I want to buy a big, beautiful house. And we talked about it. And when we were done with it, I said, man, Don't worry about that. You got to keep living your life, and you let your life shine. And through the light that your life gives off, it will blind your daughter, because the drug world is dark. The drug world is where drugs and alcohol take the light and they stamp it. It's where dreams go to die. Let your beautiful life shine, and let that be the attraction to your daughter someday. And he bought a house in a really expensive neighborhood, right next to a man. He's 2 doors down from another guy who I sponsor. And when I started with this cat, he had a blue mohawk and he was shoveling gravel wearing a Misfits jacket. And he said, will you sponsor me? And I said, yeah, I will, under one condition. And he said, what's that? And I said that you've got to go to school, 1 class, just 1 class. I know you dropped out. I know your story, 1 class. I said, because if Cocaine Anonymous is not a place where your life gets better, you're not going to stay here. And so what that young man said to me was, yes, sir. What he thought was, fuck you, old man. But he did what I said. And today he's Dr. Nicholas B. He works at TGen. He's a geneticist, published all over the world. And now a guy the guy I talked to on the phone has fuck cops tattooed on the inside of his lip. Is his next door neighbor. And that's 2 doors down from a young man that I have sponsored since he was 16, and he's now 42, and he's one of the most successful men in Arizona, and he's in his meetings every week sponsoring the shit out of people. That's what keeps the fire going. And along the way, sometimes the stories are tough, but our lives get to change too. So I was a scoundrel of a husband. I did some shit that I was so ashamed of. I left my wife after we lost a child. If anybody that knows me, most people love me because I got a good heart. I've spent the years of my life doing the best I can to try to find other people just like me that were out there dying. I did not find Cocaine Anonymous. Cocaine Anonymous found me, and I own that responsibility to the depths of my soul. I go where the ragged people go. My meetings are long and they're filled with fucking mess, but I like it. I don't like going to the civilized recovery. I like going where the wild things are. Because that's where the magic of Cocaine Anonymous and the miracles of this living and loving God are so easy to see. We watch people literally rise up from the graves they've been digging every day in these rooms. And man, that just lifts my spirit. And along the way, I got lifted up too. I got to empty the grave I was digging. As a young boy, I was a hell of an athlete, man. I could hurdle. I was fast. I could run forever. And you know, there's a beautiful book we use too in CA called The Companion Guide. And I love all recovery literature. And in that book, it says the greatest athletes that ever lived and the best musicians that there ever were never got in the game or on the stage because cocaine took them out. I know that's true. You know, this is a place where dreams come true. So as I stay sober, I started reflecting on my life. What has this thief called addiction taken from me and my family? My mom and dad both died before I got sober. I lost a son before I got sober. I have been bankrupt, repoed. I thought it was a man's right to, I was possessed, you know. Fuck, I love women. You put drugs and alcohol in me and my moral compass doesn't exist. And then I came here and I saw what real men and real women were like. They were faithful. They were honest. They honored their commitments to their families and to their partners. And I started to walk that path. And along the way, I watched my wife, Donna, when I met her. We've been married almost, it'd be like in a few months, 48 years. And when I met her, her eyes sparkled blue like the sea. And through my drug use, I watched her eyes turn to like the eyes of a shark. I had killed the love she had for me. But by doing this thing in Cocaine Anonymous, taking her to open meetings where she could hear the music of recovery, the laughter, and several of the speakers talked about it, how we, man, this is nuts, right? Because we will laugh at some shit that most people would never, ever dream of laughing at. Like I had one of my sponsees, and I heard his fifth step. It took a lot for this young man to write his inventory, and I had the flu the day he had it done. He's one of the young men I talked about living that great life up in the big houses with his other sober brothers. But back then he was a 16-year-old kid who I got to write an inventory. And I had the flu the day he had it. And I said, come on, man, we're going out in the desert, because that's where I took young men to do their inventories. Because out there, the distractions of the world that attack us in this world aren't available, and they can get some quiet time after an inventory. And so I take him out there, and man, it was like 7 hours of inventory listening to his pain. Everything he ever did fucked sexually, everything he ever did to an animal, this kid was just racked. And I cried with him, and I laughed with him, and I listened to him. And when we were done with that inventory, I felt like shit. And so now it's dark. I thought we'd be out there like an hour, right? In fact, now it's pitch black, but I know the desert. So I go, follow me, man. We're going this way. And then I feel this need to pass some gas because I'm like jammed up, sick. And I go to pass some gas, and all of a sudden my ass is wet. And I go, fuck, I just shit my pants. What the fuck? I just shit my pants. And then I turned around and I said, hey man, you get up in front and you lead the way. And so my demeanor changed. I go, no, turn left here, turn right there. And I'm giving them directions. We get back to the car. We're supposed to go out to dinner. I go, I got to go, man. And I start to leave, and I back my car up. I wad up a $20 bill. I throw the 20 into his car. I go get yourself some dinner. I got to go. I haven't told him what happened to me. I called my wife, Donna, and I said, Donna, I shit my pants. Get the bathroom ready for me. And so then by the time I get home, she's got towels and clothes ready for me. And then she says, can you imagine what that young man must feel right now? Like he just told you all of his life's brokenness, and then you turned on him. And so I called him up and I said, bro, I said, I got to tell you something. He says, what? I said, when we were walking back, I shit my pants. And he said, oh, thank God, man. I thought it was my inventory. And so I don't know what made me want to tell you that story today, but we are not a glum lot. That's for sure. You picked the topic, so you own the statements. But so, to watch that man now be a husband and a father, right? To watch my marriage blossom, to go through the difficulties of life. But right across the street is where my youngest son, and two of my granddaughters live. And every day I walk my grandbabies to school. And a man who I sponsor lives in the neighborhood, and he drops his daughters off. And me and my wife walk 4 little girls to school every day. And it is the best way to start a day. And one of those girls is my granddaughter, Nora. And she is the love of my life. And Nora was born, and they said she had a disease called brittle bone, and they said she wouldn't live long, and they were wrong. When they told us that she had this disease and that she would be born and live for a short amount of time, we were devastated beyond words. You know what I'm talking about. Sometimes life is hard. That was the hardest night of my life. And then I went to sleep with my wife that night. And I wake up in the morning and my phone's buzzing. It's like 4:30 in the morning. And it's from people in recovery, and they're sending notes, praying for Nora, praying for Nora, praying for Nora. I had not told anybody about her diagnosis with dwarfism and all this stuff. I didn't know how to share it. I didn't know what to say. And I go in my living room and my wife is in the darkness. And I said, what are you doing? And she goes, I'm sending out prayer requests. When my parents found things tough, they would ask people to pray for them. And I'm asking the world to pray for Nora. So I got on social media and I said what was up in her life, and I prayed for prayers and asked people to pray for her. And right away, this dude hits me back from CA. He's actually the chair, Justin, of the World Convention coming up. And he said, in the name of Jesus, no harm shall come to this child. I went, whoa, fuck, that's scary. And then another dude who I had 12-stepped in Holland said to me, he had become an African shaman. He said I doused myself in chicken blood in the African moon and bathed in the sea. No harm for this child. Fuck. All day long, those messages came in. And at 3:00 that day, the doctors called and they said, I double checked the work. That diagnosis was so disturbing to me. And I had other people check the work. And it must have been my mistake. The angle of the camera. But Nora's going to be a little person, but she doesn't have brittle bone disease, and she's going to live a long and happy life. The doctor said 3 times, I can't explain this. And my wife, Donna, looked at me. She said, I can. You can. Those of us who have been driven to our knees and have been forced to become believers, we know. Happy birthday. Keep it simple. I love y'all. Peace.